shell.
Yeah. So Angular Seed.
People seed, yeah.
Angular Seed. So we're gonna try to just do a very simple app with the two most common seed projects that I know of. One is Angular Seed and the other is Angular Generator, which is Yeoman.
Okay.
So I'll try just to set up like the most basic example that I can in both of those, and we'll just work through some documentation or something.
What was the command you just did after the get?
Oh yeah. So npm install. Let me see if I can.
Node package manager.
Yes.
I fell a little behind. Is there a list from the beginning?
So, basically, are you into the box now?
I'm logged into my new account.
Yeah. So you're at a terminal, right? And through SSH. Okay. Excellent. Cool. Good.
It tells me npm is not installed, so I need to power it first, right?
No, you need to just Google cool AJ86 node install script. Bring that up. And does anybody? Maybe we should partner together. So one person that's a little bit more experienced with someone who's a little less experienced, so we can work through issues.
Cool AJ. What are they googling against?
Yeah, just if you Google cool AJ86 node install script, it'll bring you to this GitHub repo. That's the command that I just ran. Mm. Okay, so this was the command I just ran. So you can basically just copy and paste that, and you're good. So can I just see who would like to go on to now cloning the Angular Seed project? Is anybody ready for that? We got 2 people. Anybody else? 3 people? Okay, so about halfway.
Like to watch.
Okay. All right, so let's move on. So there's a project called Angular Seed. So you can just Google Angular Seed. And it's the one that's by the Angular team. So when you Google Angular Seed, you'll come to their project page. And this is kind of, I would highly recommend, if you are not clear on the basics of Angular, which I'm assuming that's most of the people in this room, after this, there's a tutorial which is called the PhoneCat tutorial, and I'll just make a gist on GitHub. PhoneCat. So this seed project is kind of an evolved structure from what they give in the PhoneCat tutorial. The PhoneCat tutorial doesn't have as many files, but the PhoneCat tutorial is very. I found it to be very good. Like I'm very well versed in JavaScript. I did not go through the whole tutorial. I probably went through like the first 5 or 6 steps, and then when I got done with that, for me personally, I was like, okay, I get it now. I can go forward just looking at Angular documentation and not worrying about finishing the tutorial. But just make sure you bookmark this PhoneCat tutorial because you will want to go back through this. Just go through it step by step. Most of it is fairly simple, and if you get lost, you can always force a checkout, and it'll bring you up to what they're trying to teach you. All right. So now I'm back at Angular Seed, and they have instructions. If you just scroll down, getting started, they let you know you need to have Git. You're probably going to need to have Node. So we've already done that. So we're ready to get to the point where we clone it. And I'd recommend doing this in both on the server and on your Mac. So I'll clear out my screen here and maybe make it a little bigger if I can. And I just copy and paste straight from their website. So I did the git clone. If I ls, I see I've got Angular seed. You know, do this both places. Do it on your Mac, do it on the remote. Because when you go to edit these files, if you're not familiar with Nano or Vim or Emacs or something like that, then you probably aren't going to want to start editing it on the server. So I'm just trying to cover all my bases here. Whoever, you know, whether you're on the server or you're on Windows or you're on Mac, hopefully we can converge. So you go into that project directory. And I use pushd instead of cd. It's a neat little tip that I wish more tutorials showed. But pushd allows you to go into directories as far as you want, and then popd will take you back out of directories. So you may, if you've played around on the command line a little bit, you may have kind of been like, oh, I wanted to go back to the second previous directory I was in, and you can't really do that with cd, but with pushd and popd you can. So that's what I like to use because it makes my workflow simpler. So I'm in the Angular seed project, and if we look at their documentation, right below where it tells us to clone and to go into that directory, it tells us we need to install the dependencies. So you need npm for this. So I'm going to do npm install. And what that is installing is all of the tools for the test framework, for the Node server. The Node server is very minimal, so like 90% of what it's installing right now are for the test framework. And I have to confess that I am not big into Protractor, so I'm not going to be explaining that, and I apologize because as a member of the programming community, I should be telling you test, test, test. But I'm not telling you that today, so sorry.
So it's all the dependencies in package.json.
Yes. Yes, npm install is taking all the dependencies in package.json. And as you can see here, it's doing some compiling. So that's why you need to have Xcode tools installed. You can't just download like Git alone. You need to have a C++ compiler so that it can install those weird things. All right, so all of that huge list of scrolling aside, all that we did, git clone the Angular seed project. We went into the Angular seed directory, and we did npm install. So now we have all the tools installed that we need to start this. And let me see, how do they recommend you do it? Let me go to the README. Well, can't read it very well there. Let me go to the README here. I think, okay. So in their package.json, they've defined a start command. Oftentimes when you're cloning repositories, you'll see either an app.js or a server.js. Sometimes when they're really fancy, instead of having an app.js or a server.js, they have some cool start command in their npm directory, and that's how these guys are doing it. So we just need to type npm start. All right. Now it's telling us that it has started serving the current directory on port 8000.
Was that on localhost?
So that, if you are running this on your Mac, you can access that through localhost. If you're running this on DigitalOcean, you need to take a look at that email. Oh, now I need to get it back open. And see that IP address again. So I'm going to go to port 8000. Oh, actually, I'm not going to go to port 8000. I'm going to.
I'm not seeing it.
So, if you're running on DigitalOcean, what you're actually going to have to do is edit that file. So you can use Nano. There's a program called Nano. You can do nano package.json. And this should work on Mac as well. I'm pretty sure it's installed by default. And then you can just use the arrow keys to go down to where there's that start script. And there's a part that tells it that it's listening on localhost. And you will just delete that so that it can run on every interface. And then it is Command O writes the file. Nope. Control O. Control O writes the file. And Control X exits Nano. And it's got that little thing at the bottom that tells you. If you're on your Mac, then you don't need to make that change.
So what's the change?
Let me show again. So in package.json, if you're on the DigitalOcean box, you need to go down to where it has the start command. And there was a line that was like this. And you're just going to delete that line. Whoops. I did not mean to delete that part. You're going to delete that line and then do Control O to write out and Control X to exit out. And then I have my IP address that I got in the email, or if you're on your Mac, you can just do localhost and then hit refresh. And they should have served it as app. Yeah, so it'll give you a directory listing, and then you click on app, and it will take you to the project. And you'll also maybe see that it's broken. That's weird. Oh, I missed a step. So we did npm install. We also need to do bower install. And because I'm root, I have to do sudo bower install allow root. So if you're on your Mac, it'll just go ahead and run. If you're on the DigitalOcean box as root, it'll tell you, hey, you're running as root. That's not a good idea. Normally when you create an account, you create like a user account that doesn't have root privileges and all that. We skip that part. But it tells you right in that message you need to rerun it with the allow root option, so that's what I did. Sudo bower install allow root. And I'm going to say, yeah, you can do your anonymous statistics.
I don't have Bower. What did I miss?
npm install in the Angular seed directory. So you get in that directory, you do npm install. That should install Bower as well. All right, so I'm running npm start again. Bower finished installing. And I'm just going to click refresh, and this time, instead of getting errors in my console, like all these errors about can't find this script that you're referencing, now I get a slightly different user interface because it's loading a style sheet, and I can click on these two views. And it works out for me. Okay. So to keep this process a little simpler, I'm going to just repeat these couple of steps that we just did, but this time I'm going to do it on my Mac. So copy and pasting the same things, just doing it on my Mac this time. So I'll start with the node installer script. So I'm gonna have to remove node. So I'm gonna do sudo rm user local bin. You don't have to do this. I have to do this because I already have node installed. All right. So this time I'm running it on my Mac. Instead of installing build essential from Ubuntu, it's checking that Xcode is installed, it's checking that brew is installed, it's checking that wget and curl are installed, and then it's installing node on my Mac. So same commands, figures out that I'm on Mac, does everything nicely for me. All right, and then I'm just going to repeat again. Let me close out some of these. I'll pin that for later. So I'm back at Angular seed. I'm just going to do git clone. And then we get to start the fun. So clone's done. And then I'm doing the npm install. I'm not going to worry about it because all those errors are just related to like the Phantom JS. They're not concerned for actually being able to set up and run the Angular project. They're for the testing suite. Cool. And then I run Bower install. And then I run npm start. And then this time, instead of running it on the IP address of the server, I'm going to run it on localhost. And here I am. So same thing, copied the same commands, everything's the same. Now it's also running on my Mac. So I'm going to proceed forward with this because I feel like it's going to be easier for me to edit the files and show you from my Mac than it is from the DigitalOcean box. But the process is the same.
So earlier you did on the DigitalOcean.
Hmm?
The first time you did on the
Yeah, the first time I just did everything on the DigitalOcean box. The second time I just repeated the exact same steps, but I did it on my Mac. Let's see. Okay, that's there. Okay, so I'm going into the Angular seed directory, and this time we're going to take a look at the files. So there's the app directory. Let me just open this up in Finder for those of you that are a little less command line oriented, and those of you that are command line oriented, you can, you know what to do, how to list your files and stuff. So the most important file in, well, two files in here are index.html and app.js. So I'm going to open this up in Sublime Text. If you do not have Sublime Text, you want to have it because unless you are a Vim or an Emacs user, Sublime Text is what you use. Okay, and this was just old junk. See if I can get this view to be a little bit smaller here.
command minus.
Yeah, I tried command minus. It didn't work for me. Oh wait, now it's working. Okay, well. Is this still big enough people can see what's going on? Yeah, because they kept on going on and off.
Just don't move and they will.
Everybody sit really still.
Oh wow, there's a switch too.
Okay, well there we go. So this is Sublime Text. I'm just looking at index.html.
What? Can I go back to the, when I put localhost 8000, it gives me index.0?
Yeah, so then click on app. Click on the app folder.
Oh, okay.
Now you're cool. So they kept it really minimal here, like no styles. I mean, just like super minimal style. There's no bootstrap in here. And this is just like the bare bones. They have 2 routes. So in Angular, it's just the same as if you were doing like the old PHP style programs where you have like a, in your URL bar it goes /users/bookmarks/ID1. Same thing, except that you don't need the server component. It's just #/users/bookmarks/ID1 or #/account /settings. And if you want to be really hip, there's actually a way to turn off the pound so it uses the newest browser state management, and your users can interact with the page without it looking like the pound sign. But yeah.
Apologize for being late, but what's the trick to get on the network? At task, yes, is it?
Yeah, and work happy. So all of your HTML comes first, and then your scripts come. And the order of your scripts is important. So the first file that needs to get loaded is going to be Angular. And then after that are going to be your Angular components, Angular plugins, whatever you want to call them. But those sorts of things need to come after, because what happens is when Angular runs, it registers with the global object that Angular is present, and it has a registration system. When each of those modules or plugins load, they hook into the Angular registration system. So if you ever do this out of order, you're going to get one of these weird errors about like function is not defined, or it'll throw out the name of a module and be like, this module had error at some crazy line somewhere deep inside of the Angular source. And what it really means is either you didn't put that module in your HTML at all, or you have it in the wrong order. So make sure Angular comes first, all of your plugin type things come next, and then your app normally would come last. I guess it doesn't really matter because your app is technically considered a plugin. I like to put my app last. It's just convention to call it app.js. And then there's all of the components that are related just to this app. So we'll take a look at those components. Oops. So I'm going to open up app.js. We'll take a look here. This is how Angular file is structured. You have angular.module, that's the registration system. Now here's something that's a little bit tricky that some people find to be a gotcha. This works in 2 ways, as a getter and a setter. So you might be familiar with a lot of libraries where they have a function called getModule and setModule. Angular works as a getter or a setter depending on what you're passing in. So if you only pass in the string name, my app, then Angular thinks that you're doing a getter. But if you pass in the string name and the array of dependencies, then Angular thinks you're using it as a setter. So just remember that, because there are times when you go and you copy and paste something and you change it up a little bit and you can't figure out why you're getting some errors on this new piece of your app that you just tried to make, and it's actually just because you invoked it as a setter when you meant to invoke it as a getter, or vice versa. The config function is kind of where, if there's any like kind of metadata type stuff that your app needs to know about it itself, that's where this will generally go. And there's lots of different modules that you might want to configure. Most of them will be providers. providers are services that don't depend on other parts of your app. So you hear the term service and the term provider. Provider is basically a service, but it doesn't depend on really anything asynchronous or any other part of your app. So with the provider should be ready to use on like the first tick, any type of provider. So there's a route provider, an HTTP provider. Some cool things that you can do with the route provider is you can say, if there is no route defined, like you can go through and make nice complicated configurations with your router, but this basic one here is kind of the most standard that's in every app.
What's a router?
The router is like the #/users or #/account. So when we do, let me go back to the app. When we're going back and forth between view 1 and view 2, you notice up here the route changes. This is referred to as the route, this highlighted section.
The URL?
The part of the URL that comes after the #. That is the route.
It determines what view to load whenever you have that at the end of your URL.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is this the NG route stuff, or is this the UI route?
So this is NG route. We're just going to do NGI route first, and really, I think it'd be better to do probably the Yeoman stuff as a follow-up to this with you same guys that have already got that development environment set up, because the development environment setup is what chews up like the first 45 minutes here. So I don't know if we'll have time to now that we're actually into it, I don't know if we'll have time for the Yeoman, but yeah. So those are the routes. And what this is saying is, like, if I don't provide a route, the default is view 1. And because Angular supports both the hashbang style routing and the browser location style routing, when you define routes in Angular, you don't put the hash mark. The hash mark is assumed, because with when you get to that point where you want to make that choice, if you have that hash mark in there, then you'd have to go back and remove it everywhere. So you never put the hash mark. You just give it your route. So we're going to go ahead and open up one of those views and take a look at what that view looks like. So are there any more questions on the app.js? We're simply defining the dependencies that the app is going to use and then defining what the default route is. And then, if you want to do crazy configuration, you can learn about that later. But any questions?
So when you type in something random at the end of the hash, it'll redirect to view 1.
Exactly. That is absolutely right. So if we're doing Narvel Splatten Jarp, goes to view 1. But more commonly, it's just, your user's going to visit your app like this with, bare, and you can redirect them. That actually turns out to be really useful in certain situations, like
For logins or
login splash pages, because like you want to determine, is this user logged in already or not, and so you might want it to go to a splash page, but then the splash page immediately checks if they're logged in and then redirects to the account page, stuff like that. Like what DigitalOcean does. If you log in with a VPS created or not, it redirects you. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the file system. So same folder, we're under app, and we're going to look at view 2. And I probably should point out there's an area where the view gets loaded in the index.html. That's where this view that we're going to open up right now is going to go. So I'm going to open up view2.html. And I actually wish this would open up in similar tabs. Let's try.
you can drag the folder to your Sublime icon.
Okay. I will try that next time. So this snippet of code, or not code, HTML, says this is the partial for view 2, and then it's got some funky stuff that is part of Angular. I will go close that blank window out. I'll go back here and I'll click on view 2, and you can see this is the partial filter for view 2 showing interpolate filter, current version is v01, right? So I'll go back showing interpolate filter is, and then this double brackets. I mean, I think everybody's kind of seen this in Angular. Double brackets means that it's going to run an expression. Yeah?
Where's it getting the version, the percent sign?
We'll get there. We'll get there. So this interpolate would be considered I'm pretty sure it's considered a filter. Normally it's considered a filter. They might be registering it as something else.
I think it's a filter type. So you can do like currency, for example, and we'll do a currency.
Right. And so basically this interpolate is a custom filter. It's not part of Angular. They're just demoing how to create a filter. We'll take a look at it in a minute. And that filter will look at a string and it'll do its own replacement for percent version percent. This is completely a contrived example. You would never use a filter like this. It's completely contrived. But it's just for the purpose of showing how a filter works. I kind of wish they'd done a more practical example, but it is what it is. So let's go and look at view2.js. So open, let me just try dragging it in here. Is it going to be nice to me? Yay. So you'll notice here we are again defining what looks to be just like how we define the app. So if let me pull the app.js side by side here. Get rid of that. So here we were doing angular.module myapp. Here we're doing angular.module myapp.view2. Notice here myapp.view2 is a dependency of myapp. So that's how that shows kind of the correlation with the dependencies. ng-route is it's not a built into Angular, but it's part of the core library. It's most of the time when you start out with a seed project, ng-route is already loaded as part of the scripts that get loaded with Angular or in the built version of Angular they're providing you. So here it's doing a config step. It's also taking route provider. And you'll see projects where they do it this style, this Angular, I call this style Angular seed style, where they're putting the config for this specific route provider in that specific route provider's file. You can do this just as well by putting it into the main app.js, and that is in fact the style that I prefer. But this is a good, valid way of doing things. And it shows you what the directory is, the path to the HTML, and what the name of the controller is going to be. So this is saying when you go to view2, the route, you will AJAX in the file view2/view2.html, and then you will attach a controller, which controller is view2.control. So I'm going to show you how we take some data and put it on the page from the controller, because that's normally how you do it. They have that kind of contrived interpolate example, which I'm sad about. This is normally how you do that is like this. I'm realizing that Angular has made a lot of changes in a very short amount of time, and there's like 16 different ways to do everything right now. And
It's kind of been a little dated with how Angular has progressed, I think.
yeah, because
What's it based off right now?
1.3 is the latest, but 1.3 they've dropped Internet Explorer 8 support. So if that's important to you, you need to stick with 1.2. I don't really know what the differences are, but the differences in the examples differ drastically because as they've progressed with Angular, they've been like, oh, you know what? Automatic magical dependency injection was a really stupid idea. So the good examples will show you like this, where it's got this redundant format. It shows you the dependency for the function and then the function. The bad examples will look like this, where they only show you the function and they don't put it in an array.
Which version does
this support? Because
This one is 1.2. The Angular seed is 1.2.
I tried similar kind of thing in 1.3 or later on. For some reason it didn't work for me. Then I had to remove that and it started working.
Well, this should work. This is the way going forward how Angular works, is because what they used to do was automatic introspective dependency injection, which is a fancy way of saying to stringify your JavaScript code, we figure out what it was you were doing inside your code, and then we give you the stuff that you wanted. And that's bad, because that leads to errors.
Isn't that also because of build systems? So when it gets minified, those get
Yeah.
variabled into
It'd break.
letters, and then they don't match up.
Yeah.
It's just so that it
Yeah.
knows what's what.
There's a lot of problems with doing it that way. And when Angular first started, it came out. Require.js and Node.js were not they weren't as big, and so some of the stuff is just an artifact of you have something that caught on really quickly and was revved really quickly. And so we have a couple of these hacky things that are a little bit confusing when you're going in as a first timer. And it's just part of that learning curve. It's a little bit steep, but you just figure it out and get over it. So anyway, we have scope, and scope is really cool. Okay, I love Angular because it's like jQuery to the next level. Scope is what allows you to do nested forms. Okay, so you can have, a form that has 10 children that each have 5 children. So a user with account settings, with login settings, with which devices are allowed for each of those logins, and they can all be separate models. And it sounds like, whoa, what the heck are you talking about? But when you do it, it's really simple, and it's simple because Angular has scope. This is the key part of Angular. It gives scope to HTML. In JavaScript, when you have a function inside of a function, that one function only gets the scope of the parent functions, not sibling functions. And we're pretty accustomed to that. And Angular brings that to HTML, and that is why Angular rocks. So this is the old way of doing it. This is how you'll see most of the tutorials, and it's important to know this. So we're going to use scope.name equals AJ. And then I'm going to go into view2.html.
When it wires this up, you passed in scope that the first as a string reference, and then in the function you refer to it, as not, right?
So this right here, is this is the dependency list.
Right.
So you're saying that scope is a dependency of this function. So it's like require in Node or the define in Require.js. This is the way that Angular started doing it before either of those had become de facto standard. And so they have a third similar yet not the same dependency system. And that's how this is working. It's just defining scope is a dependency of this function.
Would you use Require.js with Angular, or could you? Would you want to?
Yes, you can, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But you can. There are some things that become tricky.
But this is the better way.
Yeah, this is the way. This is the way that you're going to do it in Angular. And maybe, I think when Angular 2.0 comes out, they're going to have a system that probably uses ES6 syntax for modules. ES6 syntax is going to be great. At the end of this year, Chrome and Firefox are going to have ES6. And then, God willing, and Internet Explorer will have ES6, sometime the end of this year or next year. And all of our problems with Require.js and AMD and require and define, all of it's going to go away. All of it's just going to disappear, and we're going to have this magical import system that's going to work for everything.
Safari.
I can.
Safari on board too?
I would assume so.
They're using WebKit.
Yeah. So, they can just backport changes from Chrome. Anyway, so scope.name AJ. And then I'm just going to put in here, my name is, and then I'll do span ngbind equals name. And there's a couple different ways to do this. I prefer to use ngbind when I can. Over, I'll show you both ways of doing this. There's 3 ways of doing this. They're all relevant. They're all important. So I'm going to show you all 3. So we're doing ngbind name. Oh, I need a space there. And what did you say?
He was just saying like
Curly is a curly
interpolation operator.
Yeah, okay. So I'll show you that too. All right, so I'm going to refresh here. My name is AJ. Now we're going to try method 2. So I'll actually do poor man's ordered list. So this is method 2. I don't like to use this when I don't have to, but you put brackets. I try to only use brackets when I need an expression, and I try not to need expressions, because if you get too crazy with Angular, you end up with PHP, and that's what we're trying to get away from. So, and then the third way, I'm going to have to go back in and edit to get it, but my name is v2.name. So I'm going to go back to view2.js. This is the new way to do scope. This is a superior way because you will get fewer errors. Because how many controllers are you going to have in your page that have name as a variable, right? And just like JavaScript, there's scope that is in closures. So it puts closures into your HTML. So if you have name in a parent scope and you forget to define name in your child scope, then what's going to happen is name is going to show up from the parent scope. And they found out, well, closures are really cool in JavaScript, but they're a little bit trickier in HTML. And so they created controller as syntax. It's compatible with the way we're doing it, but it adds an additional feature that allows us to avoid those scope errors. So we do something like this. The this object is also the scope, but the this object doesn't have some of the special operators on it. Like the $scope has $digest and $watch. Those are things that you need when you're using external frameworks, because you can't do not everything's been ported to Angular, and we don't really want to waste time porting everything to Angular. So when you see stuff about digest and watch, that's normally like you're using, say, the Facebook API, and they have asynchronous calls and stuff that need to be dealt with. And the $scope has the method that you need to call in order to make that work inside of Angular. When you're doing the controller as syntax, var v2 equals this, or var whatever equals this, that does not have those methods on it. So it's important to note that for those special methods, you still need to go to the $scope. This object only has the properties that are shared between the HTML and the code. It doesn't have the other special methods on it. So I have view2 controller as v2, var v2 equals this, and then my HTML, I'm referencing v2.name. And it didn't work. And that makes me sad.
Why did you have to var it?
Why did you have to var it?
Oh, whoops. I didn't do the thing I was supposed to do. There, that's why. That's why. Sorry. So this is my preferred way of doing it. I don't use scope to share variables between the HTML and the JavaScript. I only use scope for the special functions that are like digest and watch.
Isn't like scope will go away in Angular 2.0, right?
I don't know much about 2.0. But now all three of these examples work, and you'll see them, and when you're checking out tutorials, you'll see all three styles, so now you know what that is.
Now, why do you not like the bind as much as the new one with the name controller as?
Okay, so where did I go?
Just because of the controller as aspect of it that you like to be more specific that way?
So the controller as aspect is hold on. So you can still do it with bind. Everything works the same. It's just that you use the name of the controller, but everything else works the same. So I should have done the example like this. That's a good question.
Okay. Because that would be your preferred way, the way you did it for number 4 there. Because
Yeah.
using the bind,
Yes.
not the expression.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Also, I've done some tricky things where I actually end up running 2 template systems. Probably not something that you would do, but in those cases, I want to try to avoid the brackets as much as possible so that I don't have to escape them. One of the things I'm working on is the static site generator, and so it uses mustache templates to statically generate the site, but then I also will be adding later Angular modules so that dynamic parts of the site can be used as well. And so that's one of the reasons I like ngbind. And also ngbind is less capable, so it makes you think okay, is this something that I should be doing in my presentation of the HTML, or is this something that I should be doing beforehand? For example, a lot of people, let's say that you wanted to calculate an age. Just like they have this interpolate filter, a more practical example of this would be something that looks like this. I'll show you. My age is... So we could make a filter that does this. Right? And then that would evaluate, and so I would give the user's birthday and I would get back the user's age. But to me, this doesn't belong in the HTML. This belongs in my JavaScript. So when I'm preparing the object to go to the scope, that's where I would do this calculation. I wouldn't do it in the HTML.
So why do you prefer ngbind over the filter?
Because it makes me think twice about doing stuff like this.
Oh, like operator.
Yeah.
Expression.
Yeah, because when I get out of ngbind and I start to do an expression, I have to ask myself, why am I doing this, and is it worth it?
Is there any performance differences, or I mean?
No, it's a personal preference because I believe that logic should be done in JavaScript and presentation should be done in HTML, and Angular gives you a lot of power to do powerful presentation plugins that deserve to be in the HTML. But it also gives you the power to do PHP crap.
I guess my biggest hang up is that you have to actually put in an additional element when I don't know if it's absolutely necessary.
Sure. I mean, it's personal preference.
Yeah, okay.
It's personal preference.
With the ngbind approach, can you still use a filter?
I don't think so. You might be able to.
Like for sorting or those types of filter images?
I'm not sure. I only use it in this way. Whenever I need to do a sort, I go back to this syntax.
Okay.
So again, I mean, I'm not sure that it forces me to do it that way. I just know that ngbind it seems to be more restrictive. And I like that because it's a reminder to me, if I'm breaking out of ngbind, why am I going to, is the filter worth it, or should I be doing that in preparation before it hits the presentation layer? All right, so now let's get to something a little bit more exciting. Let's go ahead and do an array and an ng repeat. And then we'll take a look at that interpolate filter. So we kind of gone through the whole stack here. So I'm going to do favorites, create an array, and inside of this array, I'm going to have an object with title and URL. Whoops. Wow. And then I'm going to go back over to the view. And I'm going to create an unordered list. So are we ready to look at ng repeat? And some head nods? Yeah, okay. All right. So now we're getting into the power.
Which is a directive, right?
Yes.
I have a question for you about the DigitalOcean thing.
Yeah.
So does that charge me only if I have an active Ubuntu thing on there?
Yeah, so you can go in there and you can delete it, and then there's no charge. So it's charging you per hour, and it's 0.7 cents per hour. So I love DigitalOcean for workshops like this, especially when it's like really mixed. Like today, it's not so bad because we're mostly on Mac, but like when we've got the Python guys on Linux and a couple of Windows guys and a couple of Mac guys, then it's like, because then I mean, it's a long time to get people set up, and DigitalOcean just seems to be a really good way to get everybody on the same playing field.
And it's 7 cents an hour per
Point,
droplet?
0.7 cents.
Oh, 0.7 cents per hour per droplet that's active?
Yeah, so it's $5 a month. They actually cap it, like in case the month has like 31 days in it. It's capped at $5 a month for the smaller instances. Yeah. So let's look at ng repeat. I'm going to do fave in v2.favorites. So the repeat operates on the element that it is attached to. And you can still do ng ifs inside of this. And just for funsies, I'll do if so I'm going to say repeat fave in v2.favorites, and then ng if Google is not the title. And then in here, I'll set up my ng bind to be fave.title, and then maybe actually I'll do this aref ng ref with basically any attribute in HTML, like standard attributes. If you prefix ng in front, that attribute will not exist until the controller is initialized and like data's in it. So if you don't want images that have like the big X in them in Internet Explorer, or like are maybe taking up space in Chrome or Firefox but invisibly, you can use ng src, and that'll make it so that the element doesn't do anything until it gets initialized. So you can do ng ref, ng src, ng, like, yeah, you pretty much anything.
Now, will it overwrite an href if you had an href already in there, like maybe as a default?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you could put both,
Yeah, so you could put both.
and this one will override the other one if it's there.
Yeah. And some of them, like, because you could be doing something like an ID, where it makes sense, it still requires the double brackets. Because I could have fave.id and this could be like /blah/id/fave.id. So you do need the double brackets for nghref andngsrc, or ngsource, whatever you want to call it.
And why would you use the ngif instead of thengshow?
Songshow is, I don't know ifngshow is still supported or not. I think they're deprecatingngshow. I could be totally wrong. Butngshow is toggling a visible tag, and I think what they said was like, okay, we're going to delegate that to ngClass and nganimate, and we're only going to use ngif in most cases.
So the ngif in the AngularJS meeting last week, Ken Dodds was saying that you get a new scope every time you do an ngif.
That might be true.
I just thought, well, when you want to.
Well, when you're using controller as syntax, you don't have to worry about it. With controller as syntax, most of that kind of stuff goes away. Like controller as syntax solves a lot of problems. It's just that most of the tutorials aren't updated to use it yet because controller as was experimental in 1.2 and then a feature of 1.3.
Can you explain what you're doing in the ngif?
Yeah, I'm just testing to see, is Google one of the titles. So basically this is saying I'm going to show this is not something that you should do. I'm just kind of showing that you can use ngifs alongside ngrepeats.
Oh.
So I'll refresh this.
We'll do the whole list, or?
Oh, what did I break? What did I break?
I think it's ngbind v2.fave.title, right?
Nope. Because right here,
Oh, fave and, okay, gotcha.
yeah.
Need the birthday to age filter doesn't find.
Yes, thank you. That is it. Okay, I'm going to comment that out.
Oh.
Okay, cool. So now we have a list of my favorites.
Can I see your view2.js, the favorites object?
Yeah. So I'll just put another one in there for funsies. Put in MySpace. It's one of my favorites. I had a MySpace until Justin Timberlake deleted it. All right, when does this go until? What's the end time for the meeting?
I don't know, it's at 8:30.
Oh wow,
I don't
so
think we have to go that long.
okay. Well, let me grab another sandwich real quick while we all.
Probably copy.
Or, you know, you kick me out of this.
How long do you want to keep going?
I can kick off about such a thing.
Okay.
Let's wrap up like 7:30.
Okay. So we'll go for another half hour.
Oh. It'll show that you can go based on data.
Yeah, so we're definitely not going to get to the Yeoman stuff today. And Yeoman, I feel like the complexity of getting Yeoman working like jumps up 10x. Because there's so many modules and so many things that could go wrong if you're looking at an outdated example. So
What's the advantage of using something like
Yeoman actually does have a couple of really cool advantages. It will automatically insert your modules into your HTML for you. So you'll do like yo, Angular generate, controller. I can't remember the syntax off the top of my head, but it's something like that.
Just passing the name.
Yeah, you give it a name, and then it generates the view and for the HTML, for the JavaScript, for the test. It generates all of those stubs. It inserts it into the HTML, and then when you do yo build, it'll actually it has special tags in the HTML, so it'll actually parse the HTML, read the file names, concatenate, all 30 of your controllers together into a single file, and you'll end up with like some, myapp.min.js that has every single controller that you've made, and then you'll get like a app.modules.min.js, which is like every single dependency, and then you'll have your AngularJS. So it goes from like 50 files to 3,
Oh, okay.
and it does it automatically.
Do you know like a good resource for them, like
But
tutorial-wise?
that's kind of like what Gulp is used for now, right? That's what people use like Gulp for, and like.
Well, yeah, there's actually, Yo has both, I think it has both Gulp and Grunt plugins. Or am I wrong? But you can, I think they have a README on their site that you can go through and follow it if you want it to do all that. But I'd say first get comfortable with the development, because, I mean, if you really need to, you can always create a make file that concatenates the files, and you just have, two templates for your index.html that you sync up or something.
Can you do models on your controller? So v2 dot whatever in an ng model?
Let's do it. Thank you. Get us back on track. All right. We're going to create a simple form now. What I want to know is how come my Sublime doesn't like automatically fill out all the HTML for me like everybody else's Sublime does?
You probably have a plugin installed that is messing with it.
Yeah.
You're gonna pay for it.
No, I think because I use Vim, so I don't have mine set up all the fancy plugins. All right, so we're going to do ng submit. We won't do that yet. We'll just create a form, and this is really fun. We're going to do type equals text, and ng model is v2.new fave dot title. So no, I'm not going to do the quick and dirty way. I'm going to do it the way I should do it. And then we'll do URL. So I've got this form here. I have 2 input elements. One's for the title, one's for the URL. I'm actually going to change the type to URL for the second one because that brings up an interesting bug that is sometimes a bug and sometimes a feature depending on how you're feeling that day.
Now, why ng model and not ng bind? Is bind only a one way or something?
Bind is one way. Bind is out. ng model is both ways.
And that does that have to do anything with like the checker, like basically those things don't have to be checked when there's like a digest or something, or is that not how you do it?
You mean the error checker?
No, like never mind. That's not what I'm doing.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'm just gonna. I want to do something else here. Right above, or right below maybe. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I just copied that link. I'm going to do v2.newFave.title and URL. And we're going to experience data binding. So this is the block that we're interested in right here. 2 inputs, and then this data binding, I'm going to show you what it does. So I have a title, Google. Oh. Do you see this? Everybody look up. If you're typing, just look up for a second. See the magic data binding happening?
So is every character you type, is there an Ajax call going?
Not an Ajax call. It's just a change event firing in Angular.
So this is all still local here. We're not, if you had another browser open, like Google Docs, my friends, I can see their activities.
Yeah. So I mean, like, we could do something like that, like over a WebSocket, but we're not going to do that now.
I'm gonna set the URL again, he'll make it so it's invalid.
Yeah. So here's the important.
Underlining until it was validating or something.
Yeah. So watch this. Notice that it's not updating to be a URL, right? I can't click this. And that's because now this is a feature or it's a bug, depending on how you feel that day. So be careful when you're using browser types, like anything other than type equals text, because wait, what's wrong? Why don't you let me? That's weird. Huh.
You should delete field after that.
Oh, I just had to get out of the form. So the change event does not fire until the browser validation has completed. And that's at the HTML level. That's not even an Angular thing. The change event won't fire on an input that can't be validated. So, if you want to be really kind to your users, and you want to let them paste in google.com, and then just like, oh, they pasted in google.com, shabam, and you put the HTTPS in front. If you want to do that, you can't have type equals URL. You got to do your own validation on it. Otherwise, you won't get the change event. Okay, now, Angular was very nice to me because it created this object. Because there's nowhere that I've actually created the new fave object. It just saw, oh, you're using this object in the scope. So even though it's a nested object where it's got v2.newfave.title, Angular just goes ahead and creates that object for me. I like to initialize that myself when in my JS file normally. So going back to the controller, I would do v2.newfave equals blank object, just for my own sanity, but as you saw, Angular can do it itself. Now what we're going to do is bind that to our list of favorites. So I'm going to have submit fave equals function, and functions sometimes, how to say this? Every function that you create with inside of an Angular scope that is attached to an Angular object gets wrapped with some Angular magic. And whenever you're calling functions inside of your Angular scope from other Angular functions, everything's just going to work the way it's supposed to. But occasionally, like let's say I was going to create, this is a naive mistake, I was going to create a function in one controller, and then I had a service. A service is kind of a way to share functions between controllers. If I had a function in one controller, and I attached it to a service that then I shared with another controller, all sorts of weird stuff would happen. So just remember that. When you're creating your functions, they are to that controller. You can't pass them around on external library event handlers if it's a legitimate Angular function. Like if I create a function like this, Well, yeah. In general, if you need to interact with external libraries, you want to create a service for it, which we'll take a look at that in just a second. It's like a last thing that we do. Okay. Anyway, so I've got this submit function. I'm just going to use v2.newfave as my object. I could pass it in the HTML. That would be fine, but I'm going to choose to do it this way. First, I'm going to do my exit condition because I just like to think about the end before the beginning a lot of times. And then yeah, we'll do it the simplest way possible. Actually, maybe we can start with the error case. That'll be fine. So what I'm doing here is I've got my favorites array, and I'm just going to add on to it whatever new fave is. So go over at view2.html. I need a button to submit to and a form to submit to. So I'm going to do ng submit. This fires after the form has passed validation. So again, if the form doesn't pass validation, you do not get this function called. I'll do v2.submitFave. And if I wanted to, I could even pass in something. This is where, like when you do nested forms, this is how you would do this, is you'd actually pass in your nested object.
And you need the parentheses there.
Yeah, you do need the parentheses. And now I need a button that's going to tell it that it's submitting. So input, or not input, button. The default type of a button is submit. The default type of a button is not button. That can trip you up sometimes. So I am a what is configuration over convention type of person. I like to always explicitly define everything so that no matter whether it's me, as in like the me in 3 days that can't remember what I did, or the me in 6 months that can't remember what I did, or it's someone else, you can look at it and know. So I always like to explicitly define my button as type submit or type button, because if not, I'll forget, and then I'll just think that it's a button when it's actually a submit. So know that, just important thing. So the only thing we've done to modify our form with the input field is give it an ng submit, that function was already created, and give it a button. So I'll go back to view 2 so you can see there's our submit function. It just pushes v2.newfave onto the array. So I'll refresh here, and then I'll do Google and https google.com, and then for some reason it takes it a second to update that. I click add. Oh, I forgot the title can't be Google because of my ngif. All right, so I add it, and I add it.
Well, everything's bound, so your model is still changing with that.
Yep. So what I would need to do is this bit. I got to remember to give a new object. So now if I go back, now I can do Google.com. AJ O'Neill, coolaj6.com. Except that's not going to work because I got to put the HTTPS in front of it. I click add, and it adds it. And then I can add another one.
What did you do to that one? The re-add. Go back to your JS.
Sure. So I created a function that just pushes onto the array. And when you're actually doing this, this is where services come in. This is where you're creating new models and that kind of stuff. The controller is just supposed to be like the in-between. So the HTML is your presentation. The service is your data, and the controller is where you're manipulating your service in order to provide an object that is suitable for presentation or suitable for consumption in the case of forms.
So, but still, right here, you're solely client side, other than that template URL.
Yeah. So the non-client side stuff is always belongs in a service as far as I can think of. But I mean, when you're doing stuff quick and dirty, I mean, I'm a semi red green refactor guy. Not in that I practice testing strictly, but as in, like, I just want to get the thing working, click refresh, see that it works, and then I'll refactor it out into a module or a service later. So I end up doing like everything in the controller, and then I'm like, okay, this is crappy, but it works. Now I'm ready to make sure that it will work tomorrow and the day after that, and I pull it out to the service.
A general Angular question for you.
Uh-huh.
So you have this array of your favorites here.
Yeah.
Down below.
Yep.
If that was actually coming from a service and, you know, being loaded through the $HTTP
Mm-hmm.
right here, so it wasn't really defined at this point, do I need to then declare this as an empty array up front?
Nope.
Or how does it handle undefined if I'm like displaying on the HTML form before I've actually called and fetched that information?
So Angular just does the right thing,
Okay.
right? Which, in my mind, is the wrong thing to do. Like, I prefer error messages. I love error messages. I'll give me error messages all day long because I know the app's not working, right? So that's one downside to Angular that I've found frustrating sometimes, is that, you know, if you misspell something, it's not going to give you an error and be like, hey, you never defined this. It's just going to be like, oh, I'll create that object for you. Do you want to use that as a Boolean? I'll make that a Boolean for you. Oh, you're adding properties to it? Never mind it. It is supposed to be an object.
I thought that was a feature of JavaScript, not Angular.
No, that's not a feature of JavaScript. No, JavaScript is not like PHP where you can pass any random thing into the array push thingy and it'll just convert it. No, JavaScript coerces numbers.
I mean, if something isn't coming up right, it just kind of ignores it and keeps going.
If you use strict in your JavaScript, it'll usually throw an error now. There are still some edge cases for backwards compatibility where it still will continue to operate, but ever since use strict came out, I've been using that, and it usually throws errors for error conditions.
So that kind of brings up, and maybe this is a topic for another day, debugging or time sucks where you're like, I don't know what the problem is here. I'd love to see fellow JavaScript, Angular users provide, their suggestions, their tips to how you dive into. I mean, because we all love Chrome and the debug tools, but being someone that's been a consumer, not all JavaScript-focused jobs, it's something that's part of the job. You have to dive into it occasionally. I get less of a chance to totally understand how to dive into those tools. For example, like with Angular, and if you missed a comma somewhere or something.
So the number one piece of advice I have is never write, maybe, let's cap it at 10 lines of code without saving and testing. And
if you didn't write it, that's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah. So, I mean, like, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you in that case. I mean, because if you didn't write it and it's broken and you're coming into a situation where it's already broken, it's just hard. I can't think off the top of my head like a silver bullet that's going to help you.
It usually tells you the general location where the error is occurring, so you can kind of go and from there. But
I mean, I'm thinking Visual Studio or some rich IDE where you can see the state of every object, every element.
So
break it all out. Go in.
Batarang is a plugin for Chrome that will show you your Angular scopes. So
like it's creating bunch of watches in the Chrome debugger, and you can go just drill into everything without having to define all the different breakpoints and watches and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you can you can just right click on the page.
So it numbers your scopes for you?
Yeah, this is what I was talking about.
Will it use the name if you did controller as? Will it use that as the scope name then?
I don't know.
So then would you find it preferable to declare the array as empty just for
I do.
explanation purposes and then fill it in from your Ajax call later or something?
Yeah, when I do this, the way I actually code is I have a function init, and it'll often be actually like v2.init equals function.
Okay.
Because, all right, so here's a use case. I mean, I just think there's so many cool things to do with Angular. Imagine that one user logs out and another one logs in. If you have an init function where you set up everything for your page, as soon as the person clicks switch user and selects the user that they want to be now, you just rerun that init function with the new user object and make sure that, like, in case there's anything that's not data bound, there's any like state that you've got hanging around, you just clear it all out. So I do like to explicitly have, anything that I'm going to use during the life cycle of this controller, I like to put it in an init function, and then I'll just call the init function all the way down at the bottom after I've defined my functions and whatnot. And then I'll recall that function if a case comes up where it makes sense to start that controller over, like the user logs out, the user logs in. That way you can have a seamless experience where you don't even need to reload your controller. You don't even have to like navigate back to the splash page. You can, if that page shows certain buttons when they're logged in and it doesn't show them when they're logged out, like the ability to comment or like or something like that, then you just rerun your init function and then, all of that changes.
Cool. I like that.
So I do have one thing I want to show you with like the last 3 minutes we have here. This example is not complete, but I will complete it. I promise, Scout's honor. I'm going to complete this example, and you might like this. Whoops, it's github.com. Oh, stop! No, that's not what I wanted.
Just your symbols for RGM things?
No. I created an example using Angular and Bootstrap of how to do OAuth 2. So it's related to that. I
Used in that there.
yeah, because last year I created these tools and then I never documented them. So I told I went to one user group and told people about it, and that was essentially the end of it. And then I got back into it the beginning of this year and was like, oh my goodness, like I've got all this cool stuff and I don't have any documentation or any examples. So I started these seed projects so that I got a buddy that's doing one in Ruby, and then I did this one in Node.js. So let me just demo this real quick. So I'm going to open up a new tab in my terminal. And it's the same thing you did with Angular Seed, except I give you the choice between like clone your backend and then clone your front end. So the idea will be that like there's going to be a Ruby backend, a Python backend. They're all going to have the same API. There's going to be like jQuery front end, Angular front end, React front end, and they're just going to be these seed projects that give you OAuth 2. And so I'm going to have it working with Facebook. Right now I have the Facebook button, and I did the testing for it, but I didn't take that particular example and put it back. So I'm just going to clone my LDS Connect example and do npm install.
Do you have one for the FLDS also?
Actually, you could totally fork it and use it for them too. I mean, I think once I have this thing built, I think there's a lot of applications for it. One thing that I'm going to go forward with it once it's built is I'm actually going to modify it for school systems. because managing user data in that similar fashion, like there's the teacher-student-parent relationship of like keeping track and grade reports and all that kind of stuff, which, I mean, the church runs a lot like a business. You've got levels of hierarchy and whatnot. So the data format is actually pretty adaptable. But anyway, so I cloned that backend, and all it is just Facebook tokens, LDS Connect tokens, and Node.js. And then the front end, I'll use the Angular one. And so, well, I guess I should update those instructions to have the git clone in the instructions, because I have the git clone in the instructions in the other place. Anyway, so then I'm just going to git clone this Angular example as public, and then go into it and do bower install. And pop out of it, and then run serve. And it actually has like SSL certs that are legitimate SSL certs pre-installed. So you can, it actually, it's an example of SSL and a login. So you click here, you get the 2 connect buttons. I will fix this tonight, the Facebook one, because I know that's what's more useful to more people. But here, I just log in as test and test. And voila. Yeah. Yeah. I just took the pictures from the 1000 Faces project and randomapi.org or whatever it's called. Randomuser.me, I think. Anyway. But yeah, so this is a seed project where I did this in the style of Angular Seed, and I just adjusted it a little bit so that it uses Bootstrap and so that some of the structure is a little bit more what I find preferable. But it's almost as bare bones. I mean, like you see, it's just, there's a login. You can log in. But I'm going to update the example to also include Facebook. It's already got the right things on the front end. It's just missing the part on the back end. And it's not missing because it's that I didn't create it. It's missing because I had the file that was the Facebook example and the other file, and I did a pull request to the dude that owns the Facebook library to update his example because it was, now that they've upgraded to Facebook Graph 2.2, it's a little out of date, and I just need to merge that over. So I'll do that tonight, and then you could use this as a seed project too if you wanted to. And then you've got your auth taken care of. And it does the auth in the browser. Well, I mean, it requires the server component, but it does it so that one thing that people do with OAuth is they do browser redirects. They send a location header, and instead of sending a location header, you can just send the file that has specially crafted JavaScript that communicates back to the main window, and then updates the page. And I think that's really important because a lot of these interfaces, they redirect you somewhere and then redirect you back. But if you're in the middle of a workflow, it's a lot more complicated to do that logic on the server side to like get you back with the right state and the right variables. But with this approach, you can just send the user session data, the minimal user session data that was successful, do an AJAX call to make sure that you have whatever session profile stuff you need from your server, and then continue on your front end without ever disrupting the user's experience.
And you have the same scope and variables set.
Right. Exactly. So you don't have to save anything to local storage or any of that. So anyway, so that's.
I'm actually in the middle of doing an authentication service at work, so that's pretty cool.
Well, talk to me afterwards because I've got something that's similar to the hackathon. What is it? Hackathon starter bootstrap or whatever. I have something similar to that, except it's built in with user switching.
Oh, okay.
Right? It's not complete,
Right.
but it's far enough along that it works. It's just it's not pretty, and there's a bug in the text validation that I think I need to fix. Anyway,
Cool.
so any other questions you guys have? We kind of need to wrap up and get out of here, but
Thanks, AJ.
yeah.
If you were to then persist this to a database somewhere, how would you handle
What I hear is the new hotness right now is Firebase. It's not good for relational data and queries, but if you're thinking you're more on the front end side, this exercise of installing Node and setting up a VPS was like a little bit like then Firebase might be something that you want to look into because that might be more hands off, no back end style.
Is MEAN still cool?
Well, of course it is. Mean stack, Mongo, Express, Angular, Node. Is the A for Angular?
Yeah.
Yeah. I personally, I don't really. What's the way to say this? SQL is good, and NoSQL is good. NoSQL is good because it doesn't require you to have knowledge about SQL. But for most projects, most CRUD apps, SQL is a better option than NoSQL because it's easier to query and construct your data. And there are data mappers that will be on top of, like Bookshelf is a data mapper for Node.js that's pretty decent. I mean, it has bugs here and there, but it's pretty decent, and you can do. I feel like SQL is actually easier to work with, but maybe that's because I'm an '80s child and I started using SQL at my first job. So.
If anything, blend them, right?
Oh yeah. So yeah, to that effect, like what I like to do is actually do NoSQL with SQL, where one table is just a key value store with just random crap, whatever you need. Because then, I mean, you can do, and Postgres can do JSON searches. I don't know if it's as efficient as Mongo's JSON searches, but with Postgres, you can do JSON querying. So you can certainly do NoSQL type of data in a SQL database just by not defining a schema. You just put a JSON field or a text field and stringify to it.
I would be interested in that. That's not super.
Yeah, we're out of time by like 6 minutes. So.
And we didn't even look at Oculus Rift.
So I got one more question. So
Sure.
I'm brand new, don't know a thing. Where should I learn about? Are the online tutorials, you were saying they're dated and they're using old obsolete versions or something?
Well, this is just a problem probably with technology in general right now. We're at a point where things are moving faster than they ever have, and every 6 months the technologies are radically different. I mean, Angular was it's not really well architected. It's really good because it's easy to use, but it's come a long way from where it started, and it came very quickly, and like all the mistakes in the design and the architecture became very apparent, and so they just iterated and made it better and try to make it as good as they can, and now they're working on Angular 2. But it's just a struggle. So you can find good tutorials, but I say start with PhoneCat, and it might be a little dated, but it'll give you the concepts. And then you can run into the stuff on Stack Overflow where people are like, what the heck? And, there's an answer with 800 upvotes, and it's like, okay, this guy might know what he's talking about. I'll check out his blog.
Forgot what I was going to say.
I've been using the Pluralsight stuff for training, the recent ones in there. They seem to be good.
Oh, I totally forgot Egghead. I don't know how I could not mention Egghead when we're talking about Angular.
Egghead.io.
Egghead.io. Oh my goodness. Yes, you should definitely be looking at Egghead, and Joe Eames does some courses on Pluralsight that I hear are thebomb.com.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. I was just thinking like, I don't know. I don't know how those skipped my mind. I was thinking blogs instead of thinking screencasts.
Shaping up with AngularJS on codeschool.org is really good too.
Okay.
On where?
Codeschool.org is it's a free course, so
Coldschool.org, shaping up on
or
Angular.
.com, like,
.com.org, whatever.
I can't remember.
You mentioned OAuth 2. I remember getting a thing back. I'd been into a site where I signed in with my Google account, and then as I signed in the other day, it comes up with this message that says Google's no longer going to support OAuth 2 as of April something.
What?
Is there something else they're going to? Or?
I have no idea. Was it OAuth?
I can't remember for
One-
sure. I thought it was OAuth 2.
Because it might have been OAuth 1A, or it might have been OpenID 2. Because there are 4 specifications for that loopback login, and OAuth 2 seems to be the one that really has it all together.
Most recent. That's why I was kind of confused.
Let me check that real quick. But it looks like we're out of time. We should go.
5 more minutes.
So if you want to ask me any more questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So in Angular 2, are they building it from the ground up and revising the how it's structured, or
Just one second. Hey, it looks like to your point, it looks like it's their API that's changing. So I think they're still supporting OAuth 2, but like the endpoints are changing.
So just requires something to change for the people that are.
Right, and Facebook just did that too. Like with Facebook's Graph 2.2, you have to change the URL from like /OAuth/login to like /graph/login, but it's just a string change, and they're not going to actually like cut it out for another couple months. All right, sorry, I cut you off.
no, you're good. So in Angular 2, are they starting from the ground up like they should have a while ago, or
I have no idea. I've heard all I hear about Angular 2 that I understand is that it's going to be great.
all right? Well,
I haven't downloaded any beta, and I haven't heard people talk about like any beta version or anything like that.
I kind of wonder if they're going to deprecate a lot of things or go with new methodology.
I think that Angular 1.3 is going to be around for several years. If you look at, once a project hits critical mass, you can't change the API.
Yeah.
You can look at Python. It's been 10 years since Python 3, and like we're just starting to see like some of the most like edgy distributions are starting to support it. And the web moves a lot faster, but it also moves a lot slower. JavaScript has never had a backwards incompatible change. People like that. People are going to stick with Angular 1.2 and 1.3 for a long time, I think.
Well, didn't they say Angular 2 is not backwards compatible?
No, it's not. No, they're
That's going to keep 1.3 stuff up.
Yeah, the
around
point
for a
is
long time.
you use Angular, you're using Angular 1.3.
Yeah.
And then when 2 comes out, you start writing new stuff in 2.
yeah. So
Yeah, it's a totally sandbox kind of environment, or different.
yeah,
It's
and
a whole different beast.
in my experience with Angular changing from one version to the next has not been a happy one. And the development on the 1.x branch is starting to like get way more solid, but like they do not follow Simver, that's for sure. They introduce breaking changes all the time.
Fun.
And most of them are fairly easy to fix. They're really tiny things, but they're really obnoxious things. All right. Well,
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Wonderful.